Warning, this episode is rated M, and is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. The following is part 1 of the first episode of the first season of Dire. This episode is entitled, So, What Now? This is the series premiere of Dire. This episode was released on the 10th of January 2021. Beginning in 3, 2, 1. So, now what? The quiet campground has its silence broken with the ringing echo of the most important question of the night being asked by the man with a leather jacket on and an unlit bud in his mouth. I mean, we're no safer out here than we were back in town, the man says, finally placing the flame of his flip lighter to the end of his cigarette. Someone? Anyone? No idea? Okay. Finally, the blunt snaps out of her daze to fill the void left by the events immediately prior to their escape from the city. North. Like we talked about, the woman says, sticking to the hope that if salvation can't be under their nose, it must be found somewhere. If we're not going to get answers, we'll need to find them ourselves, the woman says, directing her attention to everyone in the group one at a time. The best chance we have is to get out of the center of the chaos. If that means finding a place up north safe enough to figure things out, then I'm heading north. A brief interlude comes from the leathered man and his dirty blonde-haired girlfriend. We're all going north. After a brief pause rises through the camp, smiles form on each person's face as Jaime begins readying to finalize the group's decision. Then it's settled, the blonde says, her boyfriend resting the palm of his hand in hers and her mother resting the palm of her hand on her cheek. We head for north at dawn. Earlier. Mom. We have to leave in, like, 5 minutes. Yells Alexander's youngest daughter mid-flight down the stairway of their home. Jamie's taking you to school, Kentucky. She'll be down in a second, responds Alex, currently burying her face in her purse, shuffling through in search for her daughter's inhaler. Why does Jamie have to take me? I thought she was hanging out with her boyfriend again, Kennedy responds, putting on a scowl as she stares off to the side. Mom has some things to take care of, honey. I'll be there at the end of the day to pick you up, though. Marching down the stairs with a louder step than a drill sergeant comes Jamie, the eldest. Carrying a brown satchel over her shoulder as she reaches towards the bowl placed on a shelf beside the front door where her keys currently lay. Come on, Squirt. I'm not waiting around for you, the eldest calls over. Only to turn around to watch as the youngest runs out through the door in an attempt to get the front seat before her older sister could deny her request. Okay then, Jamie says, turning towards her mother and asking whether or not Kennedy has a ride home. Alex finally finds her daughter's inhaler, turning to Jamie and tossing it right into her hand, only for Jamie's expression to begin souring as she looks at her mother. Mom? Jamie asks, with Alex asking what the cause of her seeming concern is. The two remain silent, looking directly at each other without a hint of movement until Alex takes a deep, yet brief, inhale as she rushes towards the mirror hung up over the shelf beside the front door. You go, sweetheart. Just stay safe, okay? Alex says to her eldest, with her daughter hesitantly turning back towards her car with a dissatisfied and somewhat fed-up look on her face as Alex turns back to the mirror. Rushing up the stairs, Alex makes a quick turn into the bathroom in hopes of looking for her case of makeup, one she has been forced to write emergency case over to assure herself of its use. Only to be unsuccessful. Alex continues to hurriedly begin looking through the shelving of the towel closet in search for her makeup bag, finally coming across it and closing the towel closet door, only to see her husband, dressed from head to toe in raggedy pajamas, staring on at her with a look of anger. Good morning, darling. Is there something I can? Alex begins to ask, only to be interrupted as her husband begins stepping through the doorway. You woke me up, he says, syllable by syllable before planting a firm slap to his wife's face as she begins trying to apologize. And what did I tell you about covering up your marks? He shouts once more before taking the sole of his foot and returning it to the surface of the floor after laying in a stomp to Alex's shoulder. Cover those up and clean the room, bitch, Robert says before walking out of the room and down the hall. Towards the main living space of the home as Alex cowers in fear hoping her husband will not return. Catching her breath through her muffled sobs, Alex takes her hand and places it on the rim of the sink, helping herself back to her feet before looking in the mirror. Noticing a bright red handprint plastered against her cheek. Regaining her composure, Alex places the pad of her makeup brush to her cheek, as well as the black eye that began this entire chain of events to begin with. Covering up any sign of the damage done by her loose cannon husband, Alex wipes away a tear from her eyes before turning her expression from sadness into one of an empty happiness. With a meaningless smile and lively eyes overwhelming the inner torture she feels herself containing. Breaking once briefly, losing the ability to smile as she focuses on the makeup powder around her eye. She returns to a frown before taking in a deep breath and bringing her smile back before turning to the door and exiting the bathroom. As the sun beams down on a busy downtown, a man in a hefty leather jacket scrolls through his phone looking at the headlines. Catching up on news stories, he instinctively reaches to the pocket of his jacket for a package of cigarettes, taking one out before reaching for a match to light it. Before he can strike the flame starter against its box, a woman in a white t-shirt carrying a bag in her hands walks out of the cafe front the man was leaning up against the wall of and swipes the cigarette from his mouth, allowing it to fall to the asphalt below. "What the hell was that for, Kay?" the man asks, raising both hands from his sides into the air. Letting them equal out at neck height as the dirty blonde-haired woman turns around to face him with a smile. "You never told me anything about wanting a bagel with sour cream and a side of tobacco smoke. How was I supposed to know?" the woman responds, with the man's arms falling back to his sides as he sighs with a smirk forming in the corner of his mouth. "Come on, Chevy. Let's get our move on." The blonde woman turns and begins walking in the opposite direction of the leather-jacketed, sour cream bagel-having man, causing the smirk to turn into acceptance as the pairing make their way to a motorcycle parked on the side of the curb. Hopping on, Chevy helps Kay onto the bike before riding off down the road and towards the inside of the city. As the pairing continue their path down the road, they are forced to a near-screeching halt behind a larger SUV parked in the middle of the road. Using the moderate horn on his motorcycle, Chevy tries to get the attention of the driver of the vehicle, only for his efforts to prove futile as there remains no movement from inside the vehicle. And no movement from the car itself. "This is bullshit," Chevy says as Kayla clutches to him with a stronger grip as the two proceed to drive around the parked vehicle, with Chevy flipping whatever driver of the vehicle as they pass by. Continuing forward, Chevy and Kayla eventually make it to their originally planned destination, a bookstore in an area on the outskirts of the downtown area. Parking his bike and setting up the kickstand, Kayla disembarks from her lover's two-wheeled death trap before starting for the door. As she reaches out for the handle, a woman beats her to the punch, opening it to let herself out whilst in the middle of fighting a coughing fit. Watching the woman walk past her, she returns to looking at the door as Chevy approaches her from behind and takes the handle of the door in his hand, holding it open for his biking partner. "What a gentleman," Kayla says in a sarcastic tone before Chevy silently bows with one arm to her as she enters the building, with Chevy following right behind. Walking through the tables of books set on display at the front of the store, Kayla manages to eagle-eye her friend in the corner of the room taking a seat on a chair hidden away behind a stack of damaged books. "Marcy," Kayla says semi-enthusiastically, earning the attention of her brunette librarian friend, who makes an attempt at standing to her feet, only to be forced back into her seat. "Are you all right?" Kayla asks, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and relocating it behind her ear as she reaches her hand up towards the woman. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little hot is all," Marcy responds, with Kayla kneeling in front of her and lifting up her sleeve, revealing a trail of bright red blemishes acting like a sore from the top of her elbow to her shoulder. "What the hell are these?" Kayla asks, gently grazing Marcy's skin with the tip of her index finger, only for Marcy to quickly shove Kayla's hands away before returning her sleeve to its former position. "Stop, don't touch it," Marcy says, drawing confusion from Chevy and Kayla, with the latter asking for a reason. "It burns," Marcy responds, "anything that touches it makes it burn worse." "What do you mean it burns?" Kayla asks, only for Marcy to admit that she doesn't know what it means, only saying that the best way to describe the pain is like a fire-burning sensation constantly. "Let us take you to the hospital then," Chevy says, only for Marcy to respond by telling the pair that she can't leave her job before the end of her shift, as she desperately needs the money for school. "School's going to wait, your health isn't," Chevy responds, only for Marcy to continue shaking her head, denying the help as she stands from her chair through grunts of pain before walking back to the front desk. "So, what did you guys need?" Marcy asks, bending down to retrieve a carry bag filled to the brim with containers and baggies. "Just the weed," Kayla answers, with Marcy asking for the usual amount. "Here it is," Chevy says, forking over the cash as Marcy extends her hand to hand the pair 6 baggies, all of which filled with as much marijuana as they could hold, only for the bags to fall to the surface of the desk as Marcy swings her opposite hand back to her arm, holding it through silent screams of pain. Kayla begins trying to comfort her friend as Chevy looks back to her arm, noticing the red patch of inflamed skin spreading down towards the middle of her forearm. Noticing this, Chevy taps his girlfriend on the shoulder before pointing at the wound, causing Kayla to become scared. "Marcy, we've got to get you to the hospital," Kayla begins saying louder with each plea to help Marcy, only for her worry to be retaliated to as Marcy throws the baggies of weed to her clients, shouting at them to leave the store. Briefly trying to continue pleading to help Marcy, Kayla is forced to resign to the fact that Marcy will not be helped, with Chevy and herself beginning back towards the front door of the store. Thinking it over once more, Kayla turns around to walk back into the store to try to help her friend one last time, only to be met with Marcy slamming the door shut in her face and locking it from the inside. Turning to her boyfriend, Kayla notices Chevy already on the phone awaiting for an answer, only to get an unresponsive tone from the machine trying to process his call. Noticing the confusion in Chevy's face, Kayla asks who he was trying to call, with Chevy responding that he was dialing 9-1-1. Chevy tries once more to place a call into emergency services, once again to no response. 9-1-1 is supposed to run no matter what, Kayla exclaims, with Chevy nodding in agreement, though continuing to show confusion in his face. "Let's start heading home, we'll try again there," Kayla says, walking towards the bike and beginning to take her seat, only for accidentally kick over her cup of coffee resting on the backmost cup holders, forcing Chevy to quickly reach for napkins and begin patting off the bike. "Shit. Sorry about that," Kayla says, with Chevy shrugging his shoulders mid-pat down and telling his girlfriend that it's no big deal. "Let's head back to the cafe and I'll buy you a new one," Kayla offers, with Chevy reminding her that she doesn't have to buy him a new cup of coffee. "I know, that doesn't mean I don't want to," Kayla responds, forcing Chevy to turn his head towards her and smile as she begins giving him the puppy dog look. Chevy sighs before placing his arm on the console of his bike, resting up against it before responding, "Fine," to his girlfriend, who immediately returns to her smile before hopping back onto the bike as the two make a U-turn and head back up the road and towards the cafe. As an empty middle school parking lot, void of any sign of life or joy, sucks the youth away from the children previously dropped off at it at the start of a bright and sunny day. An SUV barrels over a speed bump before coming to a screeching halt directly outside of the life-stripping center of pseudo-education. Being thrusted into their seats by the force of the sudden stop, Jaime adjusts her hair in the driver's seat mirror as Kennedy turns her head to face her sister with a look of pure confusion as she wonders how the two made it to their destination alive and in one piece. "What was that?" Kennedy asks as her sister simply places her thumb in the air and begins waving goodbye without uttering a single word. Turning her look of confusion into one of tiredness, Kennedy opens the door and begins to exit the vehicle before turning around and facing her sister once again. "Drive safely, please?" Kennedy asks her sister, who turns back to face her younger sister before sticking her tongue out in the most childish way imaginable. Kennedy proceeds to let out a small, yet noticeable laugh, causing Jaime to begin exploding into laughter herself, causing Kennedy to do the same. The two girls smile to each other as Kennedy's feet remain hanging out of her sister's car door whilst a woman in a full suit and high heels begins walking out of the building and straight for the car. Placing her hands on her hips with a stern, fun-emptying look on her face, the woman simply stands a few yards away from the vehicle awaiting Kennedy's arrival into the physical building itself. Turning back to her sister, Kennedy forces a smile as Jaime extends her fist, which Kennedy answers by returning the fist for a fist bump before exiting the vehicle and closing the door behind her. Watching her sister walk into the building, Jaime turns the radio onto full blast before texting her boyfriend Jordan that she was on her way. Repeating her earlier action of carelessly refusing to acknowledge the existence of speed bumps, Jaime drives her way out of the school drop-off area before beginning her way to see her boyfriend. Back in the school, Kennedy is given a slip for detention for being late by the principal, who then stands from his seat to make his way to the loudspeaker. Walking through the hallways, Kennedy continues walking to her locker and past schoolroom after schoolroom of children screwing around and throwing wads of crumbled up loose leaf paper at each other as information about the upcoming school dance and fundraising campaigns are read off. Eventually reaching her locker, Kennedy puts in her combination and begins placing her things away. Looking through her locker, decorated in with 3 purple frog stickers, Kennedy finds a book with the name Simpson on it before looking into the room behind her where her classmate should be seated. Only today, he isn't seated in the room, and furthermore, each seat directly opposite of his usual seat is also abandoned by the children in the classroom. Taking a few short steps forward to look further into the classroom, Kennedy notices all of the children swatting at each other and itching. Unusual in comparison to each of the other classrooms Kennedy had encountered on her post-detention walk of shame. Continuing to assess the classroom, Kennedy notices the teacher, Mrs. Warren, looking oddly concerned as she lightly scratches her wrist beneath the top of her desk, as if she was trying to hide herself doing it. Thinking of this as more than just an odd departure from the usual morning activities, Kennedy begins walking past her homeroom and down the hallway towards her guidance counselor's office. Walking through the door to the cut-off guidance counselor's area, Kennedy turns the corner towards her counselor's office door, only to notice it unusually closed with a note written on the whiteboard attached to the door's outer side reading, "Out sick, any concerns are to be brought to Vice Principal Isaac." Noting how unusual this turn of events were, Kennedy turns another corner towards the second guidance counselor's office, only to see the same result and a note directing any concerns to Vice Principal Isaac. As Kennedy continues looking around this small, yet unmissable guidance area, she hears a roll of tape being used from outside of the room. Returning to her original entry point, she notices the custodian being accompanied by Vice Principal Isaac, taping off the door with bright and unmistakable red tape. "Hey!" Kennedy shouts from inside, causing the custodian and her designated guidance counselor by default to stop their efforts to sanction off the room from the remainder of the school as both people quickly peel away the tape and open the door, entering into the room and grabbing Kennedy by the wrist, pulling her out into the hallway before quickly closing the door once again and beginning with the tape again. "What were you doing in there, young lady?" Vice Principal Isaac shouts from the top of his lungs in the middle of the echo-inducing hallway at the terrified and confused 13-year-old girl, causing a standstill for the rest of the school and hallway, which grows quiet as students approach their individual doorways to look on at the events unfolding. I just wanted to tell Miss Nara that I have Simpson's book," the girl says, forcing Vice Principal Isaac to close his eyes and take in a breath of relief before continuing with a much softer tone. "I'm sorry, it's just a little scary almost trapping one of our students in a room as as alone as this one." Catching on to the Vice Principal's break in his words, Kennedy begins trying to question Vice Principal Isaac's original wording, only to be cut off before she could truly begin saying anything by Vice Principal Isaac asking to see the book. "Why do you want?" Kennedy begins asking, only to be cut off once more by the principal returning to his echoed shouts as he demands once more with conviction to be handed the book. Without Kennedy even reacting, the sheer shock from the principal's bipolar-like conversation with her causes Kennedy to drop the book in the spot she stood, with the vice principal desperately throwing himself to the ground to take possession of the book before beginning to quickly walk off in the opposite direction of Kennedy. Rounding the corner, the vice principal disappears behind a brick wall as Kennedy remains standing there, with only the whispers of gossip of the children immediately to the right and left of her filling the room. The custodian proceeds to also walk away after patting Kennedy on the head, leaving the young girl alone and frozen in place in the middle of the hallway. "Are you coming or not? Hello?" Where the hell are you? Light up Jaime's phone screen in white text bubbles under the contact name Jordan as the eldest of Alex's daughters sits in the driver's seat of her car overlooking the Los Angeles skyline, but with an expression of frustration overwhelming her as she continues to look around the outer area of her car in hopes that a vehicle, or truly anything, will show up. With one last effort to contact her boyfriend, Jaime texts one final "respond now or I'm coming to your house to check up on you," before adding on "you're never this silent" after the fact. After another minute of waiting, raising her attention to the skyline for the first time in ages, Jaime's attention is caught by a fleet of 5 helicopters flying in formation over the downtown Los Angeles area, which Jaime clearly notices as nothing but suspicious. Continuing to watch their flight pattern, Jaime watches them continue to fly in their formation before flying behind a skyscraper, obstructing Jaime's view as the helicopters never appear on the opposite side. Completely filled with confusion, and some well-justified worry and concern, Jaime glances back down, only to be met with no answer from her lover once again. Frustrated, Jaime tosses her phone into the fold of her passenger seat and takes her car out of park, reversing it onto the dirt hill and coming to a stop when she is face to face with the dirt road she took to enter the area. Jaime then proceeds to throw her car into drive, only to keep her foot planted on the brake pedal as she watches a man carrying a cantina of water and a telescope walk over the edge of the road and into her view. Squinting to make sure she truly didn't recognize the man walking in her direction, Jaime keeps her foot planted on the brake pedal whilst rolling down her window just slightly to allow a conversation with the man to become a possibility. Walking further up to Jaime's vehicle, the man waves in her direction before jogging up to her driver's side window and introducing himself. "Eli, nice to meet you." Caught slightly off guard by the man's kind demeanor, Jaime introduces herself in return before apologizing for her worried expression, explaining to the man that she didn't know what to expect when he arrived over the lip of the road in front of her. "It's no worry," says the doomsday preparation-looking man, "this place is rather remote. I wouldn't blame you for thinking I was a serial killer or any sort of that jazz," noticing the man consistently breaking his view from the business to take care of Jaime. The girl asks whether or not the man is looking for her out for something. Itching his neck, glistening from the sunlight reflecting off of his sweat, the man simply explains that he's trying to get away from the city life for a little while, as whilst the place is remote, it is the perfect site to get away from civilization for a few days. "Well, I wish you the best of luck in your travels," Jaime says as the man begins to show a slight smile, thanking her in return for her best wishes and wishing her luck on checking up on the person she is concerned for. "What? What do you mean by concerned?" Jaime asks, which the man begins waving his hand to, explaining that her rushed mannerisms when talking to him gave away that she was worried about something other than the identity of the man she was communicating with, and he knew she was trying to leave as soon as possible. "I won't keep you any longer, you've clearly got someone or something you need to get to, so I'll let you get back to your business. Thank you for the wishes, however. It's nice to see someone remembering how human everyone around them is," the man says before beginning to walk off further down the trail he originally set out to travel, turning her head away from the window and further into the car at a much slower pace than before. Jaime begins remembering her original intentions before rolling up the car window and beginning to proceed down the dirt road she began for minutes prior. Picking her phone back up from her passenger seat, Jaime texts her boyfriend one final time, with a quick popping up from her side of the conversation before Jaime tosses her phone back into its originally thrown place once more and begins heading for her boyfriend's home. As the sunlight beams in through a closed window with its curtain raised to its highest point, Alex scrubs away with a soap pad on the floor of her husband's bedroom, trying desperately to rid of the bare stains that overwhelm the hardwood of the floor. Every corner is covered in balls of dust, and every edge of the wall is hidden behind build-up of dirt and muck. Continuing to scrub as strands of hair fall in front of her face, Alex stops moving completely as her husband walks through the doorway with a beer in his hand, causing the hair on Alex's skin to stand. "You should have gotten to this sooner," Robert says, raising his foot to shove Alex over and onto her side before continuing forward and hopping into bed. his feet flying into the air as he sinks into the comfortable mattress, whilst his wife places her elbows and knees onto the cold surface of the hardwood floor to pick herself back up. Only for each happy memory to be clouded with an overlapping loop of each slap, kick, push, punch and headbutt that her husband delivered to render out any positive recollections. Breaking back into reality, Alex finds herself scrubbing a small puddle of soapy water before swallowing the buildup of saliva in her mouth and grabbing a rag to wipe away the water in front of her. Dropping her rag to the ground, Alex stares off around her room before picturing it in two different ways. One on side of the spectrum, the room is bright and lively, filled with the memories of the couple happily married and playing with their children on the mattress her husband currently rests atop of. And on the other side of the spectrum, the dark and eerie bedroom she currently finds herself scrubbing the filth away from. Full of each memory of the lights going off behind her eyelids as her husband's hand whips through the air after finishing its contact with her cheek. Continuing to remain there, on her knees and staring off into nothing, she imagines herself being cradled by her husband after he was elected to the California Senate. Only for that thought to be hidden away behind the reminder of being wrestled to the ground by that same man after being framed for corruption and being forced to resign from his office. And become blackballed by every political medium existing. She imagines her husband and herself buying the home they had always talked about owning as nothing more than a dream. Only to remember that they now find themselves in financial turmoil as the house is constantly on the verge of being foreclosed. Alex remembers the joy of going out to dinner with the love of her life and sharing a bottle of wine on their first date night in what felt like forever at the time. Only for her husband to be forced to tell the children that they couldn't go to dinner because their mother fell sick. Hiding the truth that she was too bruised to appear in public after he wailed away at her with an empty bottle of Jack Daniels. Now, she finds herself kneeling in front of the bed her husband currently sleeps on, having passed out from a midday drinking binge that she can not only do nothing to stop, but is also constricted so heavily that she is forced to sleep in her youngest daughter's room, because her husband likes the elbow room too much to afford her any amount of comfort, consciously or unconsciously. For years, she has suffered the abuse and pain because it comes from the man she still loves, but finds herself hating just as much as she finds herself feeling bad for. No matter how much he hates the latter due to how emasculated it makes him feel. No matter how much she may hate her own life because of his, she stands with him through it all because she just cannot afford to let go of the memories that they once shared with each other. No matter how much he has ruined them since they occurred. As sunlight brightens and darkens the room, and Alex remains on the floor revisiting new highs and lows with each passing minute, the flipbook-like story of her life unfolding like crumbled paper in front of her is brought to a grinding halt as her ears and eyes become focused on the feet of her husband. The only things visible from her position on the ground, as each of his snores become louder than the ones prior. With her eyes twitching, and lonely tears stream down Alex's face as her frown turns into a blank stare of unadulterated rage. The mother of two and wife to half of a man places her hands on the ground and pushes herself onto her feet as her eyes fixate on a paint scraper lying on the top of the bedroom dresser. With her range of sight now capable of seeing her daytime drunk husband passed out with a half-empty bottle of beer dribbling out of the glass and seeping into the mattress, Alex feels the rush of emotions irradiating from the anger building within her, overwhelming her as she can feel herself losing sight of what is right in front of her. Every second she is awake is a second that she spends in a house dominated by a stranger that cares for themselves and themselves only. And Alex is resigned to living a life revolving around nothing but accepting that as the truth. This could be where it ends, this could be where she puts a stop to the existence that she is living. Maybe a jury would sympathize with her, and perhaps a judge would see through the surface to understand just what kind of life Alex is living. After all, is prison truly any worse than what she goes through right now? It may seem harsh, but it is a question that needs to be asked at some point. That point is now, and Alex is aware of exactly what her answers are. Stammering back into the now, with the previous seconds wiped clean from her memory, Alex stands at her husband's bedside with that paint scraper gripped tightly into her hand. On one side, all she needs to do is drop the piece of sharpened metal to the ground and continue to fight for her children's sake, but on the other side, freedom is just a few gashes away. What am I doing? What am I thinking? Has it really come to this? Alex thinks to herself, gripping the paint scraper harder than she would the edge of a cliff if she were dangling off the side of it. Whether she spends the rest of her life rotting inside of a prison cell or rotting inside of this broken home is all decided by just how broken she is in this very moment. And just how splintered her composure has become. Seeing the person someone swears to love until death tears them apart, through sickness and health. Cradle a bottle of liquor with more care and compassion than their own children is strong enough to break anyone. Why should Alex be any exception? Why should anyone be immune from that level of mental gymnastics? What makes Alex so special? Why does Alex get a pass? Those questions could repeat themselves inside of the now paint scraper wielding time bomb until the day Alexandra Morris dies, but as with everyone else that this truth applies to, Alex will never receive the answers to those questions that she desires. So now the inner dilemma unfolds in current time, and the paint scraper that Alex holds in the air, crushed beneath the weight of both hands, can either come crashing down into the throat of the abusive deadbeat beneath her, or be dropped to the ground in an effort to accept the crushing reality that there is no escape from this awful truth without mustering up the courage to elicit the change desired. Though the decision is tough, rough, rigid and unfair, the cool breeze blowing through the crack in the window above the headrest of the booze-soaked bed gives Alex the confidence to make the decision she feels is best. So, Alex makes her decision. Always busy is the traffic in Los Angeles, but it's rarely ever as busy and congested as it currently is today. Cars driven by people already hours late to work are stuck in barely 1 mile/hour traffic, cooking under the harsh summer sun of California's most noteworthy city. Despite this, Chevy and Kayla use the advantage of controlling a two-wheeled vehicle in their favor, dicing through halted midways between cars before finding themselves traveling off an exit route and back towards the coffee shop they had departed a few minutes earlier. As the blaring sound of horns from individual cars grows quieter with each passing foot, Chevy and Kayla find themselves back to the front of the cafe in almost no time at all. And this time with a cell signal. Shifting his foot around to extend the kickstand of his slick and pristine motorcycle, Chevy looks forward down an unusually barren Los Angeles main road to see helicopters flying behind tall skyscrapers in what appears to be a conscious effort to remain as hidden as possible to any misinformed interpreter. Taking a precise interest in the events unfolding in front of him, Chevy begins taking a few short and brief steps forward in hopes of getting a better look. With almost every sound around him being dulled by the allure of the mysterious circumstance surrounding this helicopter appearance, Chevy completely forgets his immediate surroundings, walking forward as the muffled cries of his name grow slightly louder after each attempt, continuing to unknowingly walk further into traffic. Finally, as the sound of his name being called returns to its regular volume, Chevy is ripped from the road he was subconsciously walking further out into by Kayla, who throws the two of them back onto the sidewalk mere moments after Chevy would have been taken out by a bright red pickup truck barreling down the road amidst a sudden rush of traffic. As the two stammer back to their feet from their brief stay on top of the shade-covered, almost frozen cold concrete sidewalk, Kayla shouts at the top of her lungs, demanding to know what had Chevy's attention so closely locked that it was almost worth dying over. The fucking helicopters, dude. They're just doing that whole military formation thing. It was fucking weird. Dusting herself off from the small bits of rock now stuck to her arms, Kayla cautions Chevy to prove to have passed the second grade and keep an eye out for oncoming traffic, terms of which Chevy agrees to comply to. So are they going to help her? Chevy asks, bringing about a brief moment of confusion to Kayla. Only for the blonde-haired coffee spiller to suddenly recall the conversation of calling the police moments prior. They're not picking up. I tried twice, but I just got dead air, Kayla says, shoving her phone back into her jean pockets. I thought you said we had service here? Chevy reminds Kayla, only for Kayla to respond by telling Chevy that the bars didn't matter, as the line was still unreachable regardless. What the fuck is going on here? Kayla asks aloud as Chevy looks back over to the Los Angeles skyline, only to turn back around in confusion as to what Kayla was referring to. The fucking helicopters? The surprise traffic that almost, fucking killed you? That weird smell in the air? I mean, what the fuck is that smell? Trying to think of an answer for his girlfriend, Chevy's thought process is interrupted after catching a whiff of the same smell Kayla was referring to moments prior, causing him to cover his nose before briefly choking on his own desire not to throw up. I mean, it is Los Angeles. This place always reeks of something. It's probably just some sewage problem again, Chevy says, trying to persuade Kayla to not acknowledge it and just try to avoid breathing through her nose as much as she can. Let's just get the coffee like we came here to do, get back to the house and chill out. At least home won't smell like a mass grave. After a nod from Kayla, the duo begin making their way towards the entry point of the cafe, with Chevy holding the door open for his motorcycle partner to enter first. Facing away from the inside of the cafe, Kayla lets out a scream of horror the second she enters the building, triggering Chevy to rush into the building immediately afterwards to stumble across the same exact site his girlfriend had just screamed all of the air her lungs could contain over. Standing frozen in shock as the terminology he had used moments prior to describe the stench of the smell came to life in its literal form. A mass grave of everyday, hardworking Californian citizens littered the cafe's tables and floors covered from head to toe in the same rash-like blisters Marcy had been covered in when they visited her minutes earlier. As Chevy stands there frozen without budge, Kayla places her hands from her nose to her mouth, trying to the best of her abilities to not scream once more in fear of whatever caused this scene being able to come back for a second round. Fu. Kayla tries to fill the absence of sound with words in any order available, but is unable to finish any thought she begins to say aloud as her eyes shift around the room at each and every corpse laid out and strewn around the building. Finally shifting his head an inch to the left, Chevy breaks his frozen place to begin walking further into the cafe, stepping over bodies, spilled drinks and coffee-stained books before finding himself in the middle of the room, in the center of the one site no individual ever wishes of being in the center of. But this is the extent of their current situation, surrounded by the bodies of those who died under mysterious circumstances in what appears to be the same exact time as those around them. This mass pile of those who used to live a normal, everyday life, is the one that Chevy and Kayla currently find themselves trying to process the legitimacy of. You see this? Right? Chevy asks over to his girlfriend, sickened to the core before keeling forward and throwing up on the ground before her. Not even caring about getting a response from his girlfriend, Chevy walks over to her, stepping over the bodies of those no longer with them before wrapping his arms around her and placing his nose up to the top of her head. Welcoming the embrace, Kayla buries her head as far into her boyfriend's chest as she can manage, but remains locked on the sight of the dead before them. All right, Chevy says, slowly letting go of his grip on a still horrified Kayla before continuing. We have to get out of here, Chevy says before turning Kayla towards the front door and keeping an arm stationed over her shoulders. Once finally on the outside, Chevy looks around the road they currently find themselves facing rush hour-like traffic with no regard for Californian traffic laws. Where's our bike? Kayla says from beneath her boyfriend's arm, causing Chevy to notice that their motorcycle is no longer stationed in the spot it was left in. All right, we'll have to walk, Chevy says, directing his girlfriend and himself down the sidewalk of the road, shifting to the right as a dark blue SUV comes barreling down half of the sidewalk behind them, forcing the pair to duck into a very tight alleyway for their own safety. Okay, if we follow this to the other side, we'll be able to get into the old rubber factory parking lot. That's gated off, so we'll be able to regroup there, Chevy says, laying out a plan accordingly. The duo continue walking, with Kayla eventually picking up the pace and returning to her regular self as she and her boyfriend continue forward, only for the faint sounds of a police siren to grow louder with each step the couple takes. Continuing forward, Kayla's eyes lock onto another helicopter flying almost directly above them, this one differing from the helicopters that Chevy saw a few minutes prior as the doors are noticeably open, with an armed guard taking in the view from his vantage point. Just around this corner, Chevy says, only for the two to stop in their tracks at the loud sound of coughing coming from their intended destination. Ducking behind an empty dumpster, the couple notices the coughing turn into gasps for breath. With Chevy peering over the side of the metal cover the couple currently finding themselves hiding behind to better understand the source of the noise. Peering out far enough for everything above his chest to be exposed, Chevy notices a sickly homeless man in the midst of a horrendously sounding coughing fit on top of a pile of garbage bags. "Why me, you fuck?" The homeless man screams towards the sky through pockets of saliva and mucus in his throat. "Why not these privileged rich cunts all over the place, you fuck?" the man continues, stopping briefly afterwards to scratch away at a red patch of blisters on the back of his neck before continuing his quest for answers from the higher power he intends to speak to. "He's got the same blisters," Chevy whispers to Kayla, continuing to point out the bottle of vodka the man has grasped in his hands. "It's from booze?" Kayla asks, only for Chevy to squint in the direction of the homeless man before shaking his head at a small, yet increasing rate. "No, I don't think everyone in that cafe was spiking their coffee," Chevy says, continuing to look forward before noticing the flashing lights from two police cars reflecting off of a brick wall in the same spot directly in front of the only entryway to the alley. "Those cop cars just stopped at the top of the alley," Chevy points out to his girlfriend, who begins peering through the crack behind the dumpster to her right, with only the homeless man in her view. As the couple's breathing begins to pick up and slow down at random, two police officers with their guns drawn begin entering the alley, walking at a steady pace towards the greater parking lot area. Turning the corner, the officers lock their sight onto the unpleased homeless man now spouting Bible verses at the same rate a child cries from loud noises. "Sir, could you please stand to your feet?" one of the officers asks, allowing the man to respond with the rather rude request of, "How's it about you cup my balls and blow me?" As Chevy and Kayla continue to look on, the officer's tone shifts into one of command, repeating to the homeless Holy Spirit whisperer that the original request was more of a demand. "Go fuck yourselves with the stick pigs," the homeless man responds, causing the officer to climb onto the elevated platform currently inhabited by the unruly homeless man in order to confront him, only to find himself dodging a punch thrown from his intended opposition, leaving the homeless man to miss and stumble off of the loading platform. "Drop the gun and fight like a man, you fags," the homeless man demands, staggering to his feet before charging towards the second officer, who ducks that punch in a similar fashion to the way his partner had moments prior, sending the homeless man crashing into the brick wall instead. With the first officer remaining on the loading dock, he takes quick aim at the homeless man after watching him stagger back to his feet for a third time before putting a bullet into the back of his head. Watching the events unfold, Chevy watches the homeless man drop to the ground as blood begins trickling out of his head before ducking back behind the dumpster and wrapping Kayla back into his arms. "What the fuck is going on?" Kayla asks, only for Chevy to begin shaking his head, telling her to remain quiet and calm whilst the officers spoke amongst themselves. "The neck, look at his neck," one of the officers would order his partner to do, only before telling him to watch out for the people with the rashes. Taking in this information, both Chevy and Kayla remain sitting silently behind the dumpster as the first order instructs his partner to always shoot to kill as long as they have those rashes. As the two officers continue to talk amongst themselves of how much this perceived mercy killing puts a damper on their day, a distant scream from a few streets away draws the officers' attention in the opposite direction to that of Chevy and Kayla, forcing them back out of the alleyway, into their cars, and out of the area. Still coming down from the events that have unfolded over the past half hour, Chevy and Kayla sit silently holding each other's hands with more of a grip than they have ever held anything before, catching their breaths and regaining their composure. With nothing more than the sounds of cars speeding by and screams in the distance, Kayla is the first to break the couple's silence by reminding Chevy that they need to get out of the area. Yeah, let's go," Chevy says, with the two climbing to their feet before heading in the direction they originally came from in hopes of finding a secondary exit from the cramped passageways. Sitting at her desk and staring out at the window directly to her left, Kennedy peels off small bits of an eraser on her mechanical pencil as the teacher of her class is amid an effort of diligently typing away on her computer whilst her social studies students socialize with each other in celebration of class being lecture-free for the day. Kennedy has always been more mature than those in her age group, and whilst it was nice to have a day in which she wasn't forced to learn about the history of a country she'd never go to for 80 minutes ad nauseum, she knew that there was more to it than a disinterest in the physical geography of the Maldives. Something was wrong, or at the very least, something was out of the ordinary. She had been reprimanded by her vice principal for an honest mistake, and whilst most of the teachers were present for the day's schooling, most of the interchangeable staff were not. "Look at Kennedy," says from the middle of the classroom, gaining no sort of response from the girl admiring the beauty of the landscape outside. "She's probably gonna cry now that she got yelled at by Isaac," the barely teenage twerp says before chuckling to himself. Only for the teacher at her desk to break her stream of consciousness away from her laptop to call out the boy's name, quashing any further insults the tucked testicles boy could have offered. Despite the teacher ending any efforts the boy may have had towards insulting Kennedy, Kennedy was not satisfied in how lackluster the conversation concluded. Seeing as the school was in shambles today and there was no bright spot over the horizon for the day to pick up in spirit, Kennedy acted accordingly as if it were her last day to be alive. Standing to her feet and sliding out of the confines of her miniature jail-like desk, Kennedy walks around the front of her desk and towards the middle of the classroom, shoving her way past a small crowd of similarly squeaky-voiced preteens before coming face to face with the obnoxious waste of his parents' hard-earned money before laying into the kid. "Like no, I would cry about being yelled at by my principal. But it makes me happy to know that your parents cry knowing they gave birth to you more than I ever could." With the disruption creating a silence from any student other than Kennedy much in the way. An atomic bomb creates a cloud of dust after being dropped. The teacher would take full notice by calling out Kennedy's name with twice the amount of effort as that of Kennedy's current verbal barbecue. Also, you're not cool or funny, just gross and too sweaty for anyone to come within 2 feet of you. As Kennedy continues to lay into the brat in front of her. The teacher interrupts each break in Kennedy's flurry of onslaught with a call of her name, each louder than the ones preceding it. Your ego is about as thin as the mustache you're trying to sprout to compensate for the lack of hair on your balls. Kennedy. The teacher calls. Your voice sounds like a boy cheerleader got kicked in the balls by a drummer with a metal boot on. Kennedy, stop that right now. The teacher tries once more, but to no avail as the finishing touch was just over the horizon. And I know you think your dick is gonna grow, but it's called a micropenis for a reason. There's no hope, kiddo. Return to your seat right now, Kennedy. You've got yourself 1 month of detention, don't press your luck. Turning around to her new target, Kennedy begins walking back towards the front of the classroom in the direction of her teacher. Only to shift her direction to the right as she heads for the door of the classroom. Kennedy, return to your seat right now or I will call your mother. The teacher tries one final time to restore order with what would most likely be the death blow to any middle school reign of terror. Only for Kennedy to place her hand on the knob to the classroom door and turn it to the right before turning back to her teacher in order to assure herself that she'd have the final word in this argument. Go ahead, maybe it'll be important enough for my father to stop beating her. Kennedy says before exiting the room, slamming the door on her way out before making her way down the school's hallway.